There's a place He comes to me. Though I'm blind, He helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see Him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikkonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Genesis. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store. And Joseph, he wasn't in that household for just a little while. He was there for up to 11 years. And the kind of things that he was learning, they would take that kind of time. And toward the end of Joseph's stay in Potiphar's house, Joseph would have been around 28 years old because he started there when he was 17. And now we're told that Joseph was very handsome and he was actually called beautiful. And the Bible only calls two adult men beautiful besides Joseph, and that was King David and that was his son Absalom. And so you have this young man, and he's walking around the house like Brad Pitt in his prime, and he speaks fluent Egyptian with all the sophistication of a Cary Grant. And he's a well-dressed man. In fact, he's a perfectly dressed man because he has to be, because of the type of people that they entertained in that home, because they were Pharaoh's people. They were the elite. They were the people who ruled Egypt. But all Mrs. Potiphar can do is stare at Joseph and drool with desire for him, because he was way better looking than all the actors in the Egyptian soap operas back then. And she's totally infatuated with him. But she has a real problem because she's a married woman. And Mrs. Potiphar being married to Mr. Potiphar, well, that wasn't really doing it for her, because it's not the way it is in her dream life. That's not what she wanted when she was laying around on her couch daydreaming all day, because she was young and she was very attractive. She was like Angelina Jolie or maybe a Jennifer Aniston. And she, in her dreams, can see herself with a man like Joseph. Because you see, Mr. Potiphar, he may or he may not be a eunuch, but one thing we do know about Mr. Potiphar is that he's older, because you wouldn't be captain of the guard without a lot of experience. And so he was probably craggy, and he was rough, and he was tough, and he was kind of like dirty Harry Potter. And he was a warrior. And he was actually a warrior of warriors. He was like special forces, except he's more like a general. So maybe he looked more like John Wayne in True Grit. And maybe he has scars and a patch over one of his eyes and leathery skin. Maybe a couple of his teeth have been knocked out. But there's one thing that's true about powerful men. No matter how they look, they always have beautiful wives. They have trophy wives. So day after day, Angelina Jolie, she's saying to Joseph, Joseph, can't you come sit with me over here on the couch? And Joseph would say, Mrs. Potiphar, I'm only up here to bring up the towels. And Angelina would say, Joseph, just love me. And this went on for years and years. And it wasn't because she wasn't beautiful, because she was. But he couldn't do it because he believes that God has something better for him. Because he knows that if he commits this sin, and this is obvious sin because this is adultery, that God wouldn't be able to use him in the way that God wanted to use him, and he would lose his great calling. And Joseph, he wouldn't trade that for anything. So Joseph, he never acted on this and he never encouraged it. And he explains it very well to her. He says that he couldn't because of his love for God. But that doesn't mean that Joseph wasn't tempted. I'm sure he was, because he was a normal young man. And he could have gotten away with it in the sight of men. But he knew that he would never get away with it in the sight of God, because he really believes in God. And that's why God can use him. And that's why God can lead him. And that's why God can even trust him in this place. So loving God is Joseph's first reason not to sin. But Joseph has a second reason not to sin, and that's because Joseph loves Potiphar. Because Potiphar, he gave him everything. When Joseph had absolutely nothing, Potiphar saved Joseph's life. Though it was actually God saving Joseph through Potiphar, but it's just like how God had saved Joseph from being murdered by his brothers through those Ishmaelite slave traders. And what Joseph thought was destroying him was actually God saving him. And so one day, Mrs. Potiphar, she's not going to take it anymore, because her heart has been given over to this act of sin for a long time now. And she's planned it. She's not going to let Joseph reject her any longer, because he's just a slave. And she tells herself, and he's my slave too. And so she sends everyone out of the house on errands. And the way I see it, when she sends the last servant out, she says something like, "Oh, and on your way out, can you send Joseph up here with some more towels?" But she doesn't want towels. And so she grabs Joseph by the robe and she starts pulling him toward her. And she tells him something like, "You might look great, but you're just a slave, and you'll do what I tell you." And as she pulls his robe toward her, he slips out of it. And it's not like Joseph ran through the house naked. Mrs. Potiphar grabbed his outer robe. Joseph still had on his linen undergarment. And this is the second time that Joseph has been wrongly stripped of his robe. The last time it was by his brothers to deceive their father, but this time it's by an adulterous woman to try to deceive her husband. And it probably didn't come to her right away. And she's just probably sitting there for a moment, and she's holding Joseph's robe, and she's mad, and she's been rejected again. And she thinks, well, how am I going to explain why I have Joseph's robe? And he's already outside, and you wonder if any of the other servants had seen him running out, if there was any kind of time lapse, if there was any kind of pause. And then you hear Mrs. Potiphar scream, oh men, get in here, look at this." And now Mrs. Potiphar, she's sitting there on her couch, and her clothes are all disheveled and her hair's all messed, and she's smeared her makeup. And the very first thing she points out to them is that Joseph, well, he's a foreigner. And that it was her husband Potiphar who put this foreigner in charge of them. And so she's appealing to the other servants' envy of Joseph's position, because she's trying to get them to back up her lies and add credibility to her story. And she says, "He came in here to mock me." And Mrs. Potiphar, she's holding on to Joseph's robe that whole day until her husband comes home. And then she repeats to him the same story. But this time, she blames Potiphar. She says, "It's your fault, Potiphar." And the adulteress, well, she blames her husband. And she says, "The Hebrew you brought into us, you did it." So she allies herself with these other servants, and she says, calling them us. So she includes herself with the servants. And then we read that Potiphar, his anger's aroused. But what we don't read here is that how Potiphar, he had to send out a search party to find Joseph, or how he had to chase Joseph down as a runaway slave. Because I believe that Joseph, he was just still waiting outside. because he's waiting to see how things are going to play out because he did nothing wrong. He's innocent. And Potiphar is so mad. You would wonder, well, why didn't Potiphar just kill him? Because I'm sure Potiphar was in a position where he had killed lots of men before. And it would have been legal because Joseph was just property. He was a slave. And he's not being accused of just taking a few extra cookies at lunch. He's being accused of rape. And it's the rape of Potiphar's wife. And even being so angry, Potiphar, he knows Joseph's character because he's known him for a long time. And Potiphar, he knows his wife's character, and she's probably lied to him before. And so it seems that Potiphar, he may not have really believed her, but she did have Joseph's robe, and he had to do something. And it could be Potiphar really did believe Joseph here, but it's also very possible that Potiphar also beat Joseph here, trying to get a confession from him, because being a cop, cops can usually tell when someone's lying to them, because this makes absolutely no sense for Potiphar to put Joseph as a slave into prison for the rape of one of Pharaoh's officers' wives, because that would have been a capital crime. And some ancient rabbis taught that Mrs. Potiphar spoke to her husband to spare Joseph, to have him put in prison so she could take advantage of him later. But to me, that's not really likely, but who knows? But it's right here at the highest point of Joseph's career where he can almost see what God is doing toward the fulfillment of his calling and the dreams that he'd been given, where these dreams just started to make sense again. And then it all comes crashing down. And he's worse off than when his brothers sold him into slavery. Because now he's a prisoner for life, which is worse than being a slave. Because how much more freedom can you be stripped of? So Joseph, he's humbled again. And all his dreams die again, but God's working. Because you see, God had to move Joseph out of Potiphar's house. And God has already taught Joseph everything he needed to learn in that house. But God, he has so much more to teach him to become the man that he's calling him to be. And how would Joseph ever be released from Potiphar and be removed from Potiphar's house? Potiphar was never going to set Joseph free. Joseph was way too valuable. And if you really think about it, it's Potiphar who has the greatest loss here, because now he has to go home and he has to run his own household, and he's still stuck with his adulterous wife. And you might want to think here, well, it really didn't turn out that bad for Joseph. You know, Potiphar probably believed him, and it looks like Potiphar put a good word in for him, because now Joseph's running the whole prison. And you might want to think that. But that's not true, because that's not how it happened.
You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.